starting in a minute. Thank you. Okay, so our cost action meeting is supposed to start because it's 10 o'clock and we are having opening session. So I will share the title slide for the opening in a minute. And dear colleagues and friends, first of all, good morning and a very warm welcome to Vilnius University. It's my great pleasure as the local organizer of this event to open cost action plenary meeting on parental leave and social sustainability. I am delighted to see so many participants gathered here from different countries across Europe and beyond, even Australia. In fact, our cost action network has grown to include more than 170 researchers for more than 42 countries. It's a truly remarkable community that reflects the diversity and reach of our collaboration. Your presence today, what makes this meeting very special. We come together as a collegial work of scholars, practitioners, and stakeholders united by a common goal: to advance research on the significance of the parental leave for the social sustainability of our societies. We are very honored to have Professor Marian Baird from the University of Sydney as our keynote speaker, who will share her reflections and challenges on parental leave and social sustainability later this morning. We also warmly welcome Professor Peter Moss and Margaret O'Brien from University College London, who will serve as discussant and Margaret as a session chair. We look very much to your insights. In addition, I am very pleased to greet Jiřina, Professor Jiřina Kocourková, the new chair of our cost action from Charles University in Prague, and our former chair, Tordis Reimer, from University of Hamburg. I also would like to greet and meet all and warm welcome to our working group leaders and management committee members and every single member of this very, very productive cost action. Before we dive into our program, let me express our sincere gratitude to organizations and people who made this meeting possible. European cooperation in science and technology deserves our first thanks. This entire network and event are supported by the Cost Action and Vilnius University. Finally, I really want to express our gratitude to my colleagues and friends and volunteers who made this meeting possible, and we are here now at this magnificent aula venue. This Aula Parva is a small hall of Vilnius University, one of the oldest universities in Central and Eastern Europe and the Baltics, established in 1579. This historic university has graciously opened doors to us. And I hope that you will have at least some time to gather beautiful chambers and courtyards here, provide an inspiring setting of this particular university. And also, I hope that you will enjoy Vilnius, a very vibrant city with rich cultural heritage, and I hope your stay will be enjoyable in both professional and personal level. In conclusion, I would like to thank once again coming here, and I think we can start our meeting. I wish all of us a very productive meeting and enjoyable time here in Vilnius. Now I would like to invite my colleague and also a new member of our Cost Action, Professor Daiva Skučienė. And Daiva Skučienė is also a head of Social Policy Department at Vilnius University. So Daiva, floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm honored and happy to welcome you to Lithuania and Vilnius University. You are at the main building, our old university. I and Rūta are from the Faculty of Philosophy, which was one of the first faculties after establishing our university in 1579. The Faculty of Philosophy combines a number of disciplines: philosophy, psychology, education, sociology, social policies, social work, criminology, and Asian studies. We host numerous scientific events, including both international and national conferences across all disciplines. Our Department of Social Policy focuses on various research in the field. If I try to summarize, it would be best to use a life course perspective. Our members analyze different stages of the life course, starting from birth to retirement and the challenges, to social policy reforms, instruments, and the impact on people's life, and the parental leave policy as well. The parental leave policy troubles our politicians from time to time. The last one was related to the European Union directive and its implementation on national policy. And we had public discussions during this time. So I am glad to be at this fantastic gathering of researchers that are interested in the subject today. And the benefit of being together is exchanging ideas and knowledge while establishing connections for the present and future collaboration. I hope this discussion and exchange time will be enjoyable for you.
Thank you very much, Daiva. And now we have one more keynote speaker, Professor Jiřina Kocourková, Action Chair from Charles University in Prague. Unfortunately, Jiřina is not here, so we'll try to connect her via Teams. So let's see if we will manage to do that.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and guests. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our plenary meeting, this time held in Vilnius. As you know, we in Prague have taken over the leadership of this successful cost action. It is both an honor and a challenge for us, one that comes with the responsibility to continue the work as effectively as Tordis from Hamburg, who set the bar very high. At the same time, it is extremely important to me that Margaret continues as a vice chair. Her involvement ensures both the continuity of the project and the high level of expertise that has characterized it from the beginning. I accepted this role not only because the project is running so well, but also because I am deeply aware of the solid foundation it is built upon, a professional network that has existed for years and which I've been part of it since its beginning. Working within this network has been incredibly stimulating and has offered me a space for professional growth. I hope it will serve as such a cornerstone for you too, whether you joined at the start or came in later during your career. Charles University is the most prominent and oldest university in the Czech Republic and one of the oldest in Europe. The Faculty of Science, which is the actual grant holder of this cost action, is one of 70 faculties and ranks among the top in terms of scientific performance. Thanks to the high reputation of this project, the faculty has provided excellent conditions to manage it efficiently, which enabled us to take over the coordination. Our department, the Department of Demography and Geodemography, where I serve as head, provides strong academic support to the action, reflecting our interdisciplinary approach in both teaching and research. In our research, we have long focused on parental leave as a key element of family policy, one that supports people in achieving their reproductive goals and is reflected in fertility trends. The concept of social sustainability is highly topical and increasingly urgent, especially in light of the current fertility decline across much of Europe, a decline that is most dramatic in the Czech Republic. The link between parental leave and social sustainability is also at the heart of our ongoing national and EU-funded research projects such as Contemporary Reproductive Challenges, financed by Czech Science Foundation, and Opportunities and Risks of Social Individualization, financed by Operational Program Research. Due to the growing societal impact of demographic trends, our department is increasingly sought after by policymakers. In fact, because of the sharp fertility drop in the Czech Republic, I was asked last year to lead the expert team for demographic stability under the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. This week, the Ministry is holding the National Family Policy Forum, a major event bridging academic and applied perspectives. I have been invited to speak at the opening panel tomorrow alongside the Minister and other stakeholders, and that is, unfortunately, the reason why I couldn't be in Vilnius with you in person. The Ministry is also an important stakeholder for us, as we will seek its support in organizing the final Cost Action Conference in Prague next year. And that brings me to the final year of our project, the most intense and important phase. We will complete and present our key outputs, and I believe we will succeed in delivering meaningful and impactful results. To close, I would like to thank Rūta for taking on the organization of this major event, and I truly look forward to welcoming you all in Prague next year for our concluding conference. I wish you a productive and inspiring meeting over the next 2 days. Thank you.
We are moving to our program, and next in our program we have keynote session. And I'd like to invite Professor Marian Baird from University of Sydney and Professor Margaret O'Brien and Professor Peter Moss from University College London to come here. And we start our keynote session in a moment.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Margaret O'Brien, the Vice Chair of this Cost Action Programme, and I'm really, really delighted to be here with you all and most significantly, to introduce the next session. I think that our keynote, Professor Marian Baird, doesn't need too much of an introduction. I was trying to think when I first met her, and I just can't remember, maybe it's my age, but I've known her for many years. And I was extremely pleased and over the moon, in fact, when she accepted the invitation to be our keynote today. And Marian, as we know, I think significantly in the current times, was awarded the Order of Australia for her outstanding contributions to the lives of working women and services in her country. And we are primarily a European network, so to have Marian in that position here is exceedingly relevant and exciting for us. She works as a professor of gender and employment relations at the University of Sydney, and she's also co-director of the business school there. She currently also does coordination with others of the International Parental Leave Network that's meeting in Vilnius later in the week. So we've got a whole week here of parental leave in this city. And I think maybe your ministers will take note. I've heard from Rūta and other colleagues. I wish the UK ministers would be in the same, have the same sympathy. Marian's published widely in her field. She was involved in directing as well as actually evaluating the first paid parental leave scheme in Australia in 2010, evaluated in 2014, and the amendments have happened significantly afterwards. Mary and I wrote a paper some years ago where we discussed the Anglophone context, and really Australia is zooming ahead in some ways, as is Canada, New Zealand and Ireland, and the outlier Britain stays behind, very sad, as some presidents say, sad. Her most recent book is Tracking Work Care Policies in Australia in 2024, A Turning Point, excellent book. And the research she's working on now, which will also be published shortly, is called The Reproductive Body at Work. And as ever, Marian is being very innovative in her scholarship and policy advocacy. And her lecture today is going to draw on that field of scholarship. I just want to say something before we move to hear Marian on the discussant, our dear friend, colleague, Emeritus Professor Peter Moss. Dear friend, we've worked many years together in our unit at UCL, the Thomas Coram Research Unit, and again we were very, very pleased and delighted when he agreed to be the discussant, and I'll be very interested in the dialogue that emerges between the lecture and the comments. Peter, as we know, was the founder, along with Fred Devon, of the International Parental Leave Network, over 20 years ago in 2004, building on his EC network experts on childcare. I know Peter doesn't like the phrase childcare, but I think it was called that. He's the author of many books and articles, critically analysing children's services for children, and working parenthood. So we are in for a treat here today to stimulate our thoughts on parental leave, social sustainability, the interfaces between them, on gender work and care. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Marian's title, Parental Leave and Social Sustainability, Reflections and Challenges.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just get myself set up here. And I hope you don't mind, I will be reading from my speech. There's so much there that I wanted to make sure I got right. But before I begin, I really want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Margaret and the Cost Action Group for inviting me here today. to Rūta for organising it all and doing such a splendid job for hosting us here, and in advance to Peter for providing the comments and reflections on what I'm going to say. I'm slightly terrified actually, because Peter has an amazing intelligence and will, I know, pick up on some issues that he thinks I should have thought of differently. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. I also want to say how different it is to be in Europe compared to Australia. We are proudly celebrating 175 years of the first university in Australia, the University of Sydney. But it just makes me reflect on the history of Europe, of course, and this beautiful university and these rooms, that pales into insignificance when we think of the generations of knowledge that have been delivered and stored and researched here. In Australia, of course, we are much more aware of our First Nations people now and would normally also acknowledge the country that we are on in Australia. I wouldn't do that here because clearly I'm not on Aboriginal country, but just to let you know, I come from Gadigal country, which is the country that surrounds Sydney Harbour, and it is the country that the first settlers from Britain came to in 1788. And when you think about that vast continent that I live on, 800 people approximately, 400 soldiers, 400 convicts, began a country in a place that no one really knew about beforehand. So we're trying to very hard these days to understand our First Nations people and their connection to country, and to, where we can, unite that with our own traditions and conventions of white people in the country. And as you can imagine, you've probably seen, we've had some very difficult times. However, we are in a new phase. We have just re-elected a Labor government. And I think that's important for the context and the policies I'm going to talk about, a government that rejected much of what is going on in other parts of the world, particularly the United States. So against that, there's a few things I want to bring to this particular discussion this morning. And I'm very aware that the people I'm talking to here in person and online know significantly more about some of the details. What I'm trying to give you here is a sort of an overview of where I see some of the quite challenging areas that we're facing, some areas we may want to revisit, and where we might think about opening new research horizons, new policy areas. It actually fits very well with our opening speaker who was online, because she raised the issue of demographics, and I think that's really important for where we are today globally in most countries around the world, and I will be referring to that as well. So this is the sort of structure of the speech I want to give. I want to talk a little bit about how I've interpreted social sustainability and the progress we've had to date. How does parental leave fit into that, and what challenges are there? And then I would like to take us into considering some new policy areas. This is the Great Hall of the University of Sydney, and that's our jacaranda tree, which is actually not a native, but it's a very prominent tree in our quadrangle at Sydney University. Sorry, I've jumped ahead. I want to talk first of all about social sustainability, and progress to date. I had some trouble, I have to say, trying to determine how I would define social sustainability, and fortunately a discussion I had last night over dinner with Andrea and Johanna sort of helped me justify the approach I've taken today. And that is that I began by reading the wonderful work that Ivana and colleagues have produced, and then I also went to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm going to draw on those here because I'm imagining that many people at universities in this situation, we've been encouraged and directed to incorporate the SDGs where we can into our teaching and into our research. So I'm very familiar with some of them, but not all of them, of course. There are 17. But it led me to read the UN's reports on the Sustainable Development Goals 2024 and 2023 and the progress that has or has not been achieved. The four I wanted to consider are Goal 1, poverty and ending poverty, Goal 3, good health and well-being and promoting that, Goal 5, gender equality and how we support shared care and reduce labour market inequalities, and Goal 8, decent work and economic growth by promoting more inclusive and supportive workplaces. But I'd have to say that progress on all of those has been rather slow and patchy, and it would appear from the reports of the UN, the most recent one, the report of the Secretary-General on the progress towards the SDGs, says that very few will be met by 2030, and indeed even by 2050. So we are in a difficult position. On goal number 1, poverty rates, the report says, and I'm just drawing out the things that are really pertinent to us in this arena of parental leave and social sustainability. On goal number 1, the report says ending poverty by 2030 appears to be increasingly out of reach, particularly in regions that lack the fiscal capacity to cope with economic stresses. On goal 3, health and well-being, the report says achieving global health goals faces significant challenges, with progress slowing since 2015, especially in areas like maternal mortality. Goes on to say there has been a very slight 1% improvement in family planning access for women 15 to 49 years of age. On goal 5, on gender equality, the wording is even stronger. Progress towards gender equality is clearly off track. Many women still lack control over their sexual and reproductive health, and violence against women persists. Urgent action is needed to challenge biased social norms, eliminate harmful practices, and change discriminatory laws. On goal 8, decent work, there are also very worrying signs. There is declining protection of labour rights, with the report noting that from 2015 to 2022, the global average level of national compliance with labour rights actually declined by 7%. And this occurred in both high-income and lower-income countries, or developed and developing countries. So clearly, there is a lot to be concerned about. And it looks at the moment that social sustainability is an aspiration rather than something we will achieve. So that's a bit of a pessimistic opening, but I'd like to say the research that you do, the advocacy that many of us take part in, could change, hopefully, some of this around. So how does parental leave fit into this? Well, interestingly, parental leave is not mentioned specifically in the UN reports, but we do know it's a very important tool to assist in being socially sustainable, to achieve those goals. As Ivana and her colleagues say, access to well-paid parenting leaves can indirectly contribute to socially sustainable societies by reducing poverty, securing health and well-being of parents and children, and supporting gender equality and reducing inequalities. So I would add that parental leave is also a crucial element of decent working conditions for women and for men, especially as women's labour force participation rates continue to rise, and especially as governments around the world continue to urge more women into the labour market. But I argue that social sustainability does not only refer to the ability for society to continue in good health with equality and decent work and living standards, it also includes the ability of a society to reproduce itself in a positive way. That is, reproductive labour including the care of family and community, as well as the actual act of physical reproduction, is an essential foundational element of social sustainability. However, discussions of parental leave are often silent on the labour leading to reproduction, the labour that is performed by women. So are there other policy areas that we should be considering when discussing parental leave and sustainability? This is a question I will return to towards the end of my speech. But before then, I'd like to address or raise some challenges I see with parental leave policy as we currently see it practiced and developed. So to move on to point 2, parental leave and social sustainability challenges. We all know that a well-structured and properly funded parental leave system can do a lot. We know it can help increase men's participation in caregiving, support women to stay engaged in paid work, promote gender equality, and improve the health and well-being of mothers, children, and fathers too. Good parental leave policies aren't just about family support. They're also a marker of decent quality work. When done well, they offer multiple benefits for families, for employers, and for society at large. That is, for social sustainability. But what are the challenges we have to face right now? And I'm just going to focus on a few. I know there's probably many others that we could raise and perhaps will come in discussion. Excuse me. The first I want to say is that how do we encourage men to participate more in the uptake of parental leave policy? And how do we prevent the stigmatising of men who do take parental leave? Now, I know that we have seen considerable changes in this area, and much of that is due to the research that people in the Cost Action Network and the Parental Leave Network have undertaken over 20 or 30 years. But what intrigued me in some research we were doing in Australia was this notion of what's now beginning to be documented as shareable leaves. And at the moment, and I'll put up a graph about this, apologies for countries that weren't included, but this is from the OECD, their 2024 family database. As you can see on this, a large number of countries now include quite a sizable proportion of their parental leave entitlement as shareable leave. That is, leave that can be taken by either the mother or the father. But we know that women still continue to take most of that leave, and that men will take the reserved or earmarked leave for fathers if it is well paid, but they tend not to go into this or take much of the shareable leave. And I wonder why that is the case, and I'm sure people have done research on this. We've done some small focus group work. And the things that seemed to come out of that research were that where the option is to share the leave, women and most often men would still prefer mothers to care for infants. There's still a remaining strong cultural and workplace norm to see caregiving of babies and infants particularly as women's work. There are concerns that men have about the career penalties or stigmas associated with taking extended leave, despite the fact that we know mothers have put up with that for generations. And there's often very limited modelling from leadership in firms to normalise the uptake of parental leave by men and to participate in the sharing of leave. So, relatedly, and extending this thought, and from our experience in proposing changes to the Australian parental leave system, it was quite clear, because we only had 2 weeks set aside for men, it was quite clear that men, if they were going to participate in caring, and if we were going to encourage gender equality, which is one of the objectives of our Parental Leave Act, that we would have to do something more to encourage men to take up the leave. However, when we talked to them about shareable leave, again, they said they would rather, if they took it, only take it if the mother was on leave at the same time. So we had this issue of concurrent or simultaneous use of leave. And we know that in the interests of achieving gender equality, encouraging men to actually care on their own for young children has benefits over the longer term and begins to shift gender roles as those children grow and changes their behaviours in the household. However, they're not willing to take that leave, or there's not a great enough incentive for men to take the shareable portion of the leave. So I think more research is really needed in this area to understand what's the extent, drivers and implications of these preferences, and to interrogate the gender, cultural and community expectations that may be at play that bring these preferences to light when the baby is actually born. Another critical gap I've noticed in the research is that about how do we address the needs of the informal workforce. We know that many informal workers are women and they're of childbearing age, yet they are almost entirely excluded from paid parental leave systems, which are typically built around formal employment relationships. This is not a marginal issue. In many countries, informal employment accounts for the vast majority of labour force participation. And on the following slide, this is a map generated by the ILO of informality or informal employment in countries around the world. Now, while this map does demonstrate those countries that we're most familiar having high levels of informal employment, it tends to not include the pockets, the persistent pockets of informal employment in even the high-income developed countries like Australia, I imagine the UK, USA and Canada, for example, much of Europe as well. And I suspect that informal employment is growing in periods or as a result of immigration and lack of access to labour market formal employment. So there are significant groups of informal workers. Often they are marginalised in other ways as well, who therefore do not have any access to paid parental leave. And if I take us back to this question of social sustainability, we know that exclusion from support at the critical point of childbirth and early caregiving leaves many women economically vulnerable, increasing the risk of poverty and long-term disadvantage. Lack of paid leave can also force women to leave the workforce altogether, and these exclusions often reinforce structural inequalities, particularly for First Nations women, migrant women, and culturally and linguistically diverse women. So without deliberate policy intervention, paid leave schemes can risk becoming another driver of inequality, benefiting those already in secure, better paid jobs and leaving others behind. How can we bring the issue of parental leave supports to the attentions of those policymakers who are responsible for the informal sector? This is actually quite a challenge. And as an aside, in other research I'm doing on the concept of women's economic empowerment and the way in which governments proclaim this, often included in their aid programs, it's quite noticeable that paid parental leave or parental leave in any form is not included in women's economic empowerment strategies. So the next point I want to make is that in addition to informal employment, and these two may be closely related, is the matter of non-compliance with labour laws. As I mentioned in the SDG reports, this is a problem that is actually growing, but it's not one that we've researched extensively in relation to parental leave. We know in Australia, for example, that despite a very strong regulatory framework for our employment system, unlawful discrimination against pregnant women and women returning to work after childbirth continues to occur. I wonder how widespread is this non-compliance and discrimination in other countries. So in summary, I've identified 4 distinct areas of parental leave that would benefit from further research. These are men's continuing underuse of parental leave, the concurrent use of parental leave and gender patterns and preferences, parental leave access in the informal sector, and non-compliance with parental leave policies. But what are the challenges for the future? And here I want to turn to a relatively new policy area, one that I have been looking at for a few years with a couple of colleagues at Sydney University, and this is one that we're calling reproductive support and leave policies. Some fundamental shifts are occurring in global demographics, as we all know. These are the ageing of the population and the decline in fertility rates. The latter, the decline in fertility rates, is of direct relevance to parental leave. But do we actually know if parental leaves assist people when they're making decisions to have children? Does it enable people to have as many children as they wish? It would seem not, because we've known for some time that people report they want more children than they have, the ideal versus the actual, and that in most countries, the number of children they want to have is above the replacement rate of 2.1. But at present, nearly 2/3 of the global population lives in countries with fertility rates below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. I could have put up many, many other countries, but the pattern is the same everywhere. What we are seeing is a significant and prolonged shift in the number of live babies born around the world. In Australia, the USA, the UK, EU and Scandinavia, all these countries have fertility rates below 2.1. That means they cannot naturally replace their populations. This has implications for gross domestic product. It has implications then for the economic well-being of a country, and of course will flow through to the financial considerations when governments are considering funding social policies. Germany, Italy and Spain are below 1.5, and Korea is well below 1. Some people in Australia refer to this trend as the baby boycott or the baby strike. But I think it's more complex than that, and those terms tend to put the emphasis on women as the sole deciders of who has babies. And we know from our lives, our own lives, our children's lives, and observing and researching the lives of young women and men around our own countries, that these decisions are complex decisions now, and they hinge much more on just a desire to have a child. They're driven by housing, economic security, job security, and social norms, which are changing considerably. This situation has also resulted in, or coincided with, not sure of the causal connections yet, a rise in pro-natalist policies in some countries, where the emphasis has turned back to promoting the full-time male breadwinner and the full-time female carer model. And that is not a model that is promoting gender equality. There are also the political and social dimensions to consider, including the rise of anti-immigration sentiment, the backlash from conservative groups promoting ultra-traditional values, and growing discontent amongst some groups of men who obviously feel left behind. These dynamics present real challenges, and I think we need to confront them directly and try to understand what is driving these reactions. They also serve as a reminder that ongoing vigilance and sustained advocacy for progressive policy reform remains essential. I don't know how many times in Australia we've had to get up at various points and defend the paid parental leave policy. So it's often a case of 2 steps forward and 1 step back in the arguments. But we're now at a point, I think, where that argument has been settled and it's time to look beyond. So now I'd like to move our thinking to other policies that may assist us in promoting or achieving social sustainability. To put it bluntly, without babies being born, parental leave systems become redundant. So this brings me to a critical question. Is our focus on parental leave policies misplaced, given this broader challenging and changing context? Should we instead or also be considering a wider suite of reproductive policies? As I said, this is an area that's been intriguing myself and my colleagues for a few years. And about 8 years ago, we established sort of an informal research network called the Reproductive Body at Work. We began that research, and I presented it at one of the network conferences in Canada. We began that research because we had noticed the spread of menstrual leave policy, often in those informal labour market countries that I had on the map before. We've charted the history and the location and the design of menstrual leave policies around the world. But then very quickly, our focus expanded because we noticed that there was a much broader range of issues that was beginning to make itself felt in the press, in the community, amongst women's groups, that had not been really tagged or picked up on by researchers. But you will have seen this yourselves now, I'm sure. And this broader range of interests expanded to encompass issues like endometriosis, egg freezing, and assisted reproductive technologies, as well as menopause policies. These were gaining attention often more quickly in businesses who were keen to attract talented labour, or the war for talent, as they often say, and in businesses in the tech sector. Not just in the USA, but there are particularly interesting advances being made in this area in India. So we began to argue that the reproductive body in all its stages, from menstruation to fertility treatments to pregnancy and birth through to menopause, are integral to social reproduction and gender equality. We know that the use of assisted reproductive technology is on the rise. And in this graph, we see that more than 10 million children have been born with assisted reproductive technology since about 1977, I think it was. And that some countries really stand out. Spain always comes up as a country that has high rates of use of ART. So too does the United States and Australia, and you can see the other countries here. It's estimated that nearly 8% of children born in Europe and 5% of children born in the USA in 2018 in both spheres were born using assisted reproductive technologies. We can also guess that ART use will continue to rise. Now, I found it much harder to get good information on that, so I did what our students do. I used Gen AI to predict. Now, some of the predictions came up differently, but there was a bit of a consensus. And so I've put this one up. This seemed to be, to me, a reasonable prediction. It's predicting the estimated global birth rate using assisted reproductive technology from 1978, when the first baby was born, to 2050. And you can see the blue line is the minimum rates of projection, and the red line is maximum rates, up to 50%. 50 million, sorry. But you can see here that whichever projections we take, there is going to be a continued increase in ART. And I'm sure if you talk to family members, to your own children, to your brothers and sisters' children, you will know that the use of ART in many different ways is widely used. The point is, though, that ART, or assisted reproductive technology, takes a lot of resources. It takes time and additional costs pre-birth, sometimes many years, and repeated occasions before a successful birth. This is incredibly draining on both parents or the single or solo parent if she has decided to have children alone, and that too is an increasing trend. To my knowledge, most parental leave policies do not cover the time and cost required to have ART. A quick search of our own Leave Network's annual reports, and again with some help from Gen AI, suggested the following for certain selected countries, which shows that most policies include assisted reproductive technology as part of a medical or sick leave policy, not as a separate policy and not as part of parental leave. From that research, Greece and Malta do stand out as providing separate paid leaves. Now, I'd be happy for us to sort of interrogate this. This was from a quick sort of review of our annual reports and, as I said, some Gen AI assistance. But I think it's very interesting that most people, and from my own experience in our country, are using the medical leave system where it allows support for artificial reproductive technology supports. So I've talked about the idea of using additional technologies to enable conception and birth, but what would these policies look like? So this takes us into the policy area, the area that we're most familiar with dealing with. So we can turn to some real-life examples. Looking at Malta, the government in 2017, because they were concerned with their low population growth rate, introduced 100 hours of paid leave from work, with 60% going to the parent who is receiving the IVF treatment in that case, and 40% going to the other parent. Single parents are entitled to 60 hours of paid leave. In Ireland, in March 2021, a private member's bill was tabled in the Irish Senate, proposing a reproductive health-related leave entitlement, including 10 days of paid leave for employees receiving treatment in relation to pregnancy, childbirth, or assisted human reproduction. Despite a lot of support from the union movement and the Labor government at the time, the bill stalled. And as of January 2024, it was suggested, or it was announced, that there would be a 12-month delay was needed to allow sufficient time to consider the proposal. We are entering new policy territory, clearly, and a lot of thought, or perhaps unease, surrounds these policies. Unions in Australia have been particularly active in supporting this policy agenda. In 2020, the Victorian branch of a union called the Health and Community Services Union put in a claim for 5 days paid leave in their collective bargaining agreement with their employer. The employer was the Health Department of Victoria. The claim covered a wide range of reproductive health and wellbeing issues because their intent was to bring in members, both male and female, and of different ages to support the claim. It included menstruation, menopause, fertility treatments, hysterectomies, vasectomies, miscarriages, terminations, a very controversial area, and gender affirmation, with a strong emphasis on the need for additional workplace support for people on what were called difficult family formation journeys, For example, those involving multiple rounds of fertility treatment and those who experienced pregnancy loss. 4 years later, that same union at the national level launched a national campaign for a minimum of 12 days paid reproductive leave, lobbying the Australian government to make this entitlement available to all workers under national labour law. The government at the time, was just before the election, said it wasn't ready yet to consider this but would put it on the policy agenda. The idea of a universal reproductive leave entitlement was backed by the federal peak union body, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, and they argued in a very widely popularised campaign, It's for Everybody, for 10 reproductive days. As I said, the government federally hasn't agreed to it, but in 2024, the Queensland state government introduced 10 days paid reproductive leave for public servants. So we are seeing movement, and we will see change, I would predict, over the next few years, with this being one of the policy areas that is really picked up by governments and unions and businesses. At the other end of the political spectrum, though, and for different reasons, in 2025, the Trump administration announced it would aggressively consider ways to reduce out-of-pocket and health plan costs for IVF, saying it recognises the importance of family formation and that our nation's public policy must make it easier for loving and longing mothers and fathers to have children. However, that policy reflects the rise of the strong pronatalist agendas in in America, rather than gender equality goals. So where do I get to? More research is needed, I suggest, on these 5 areas, on whether shared leave should be used or could be used by fathers concurrently or separately, and which should we support, on concurrent leave, how it's discussed and worded in policies and how it will be used and is used by parents, on the availability of paid parental leaves to the informal sector and precarious workers, on compliance with labour laws and policies, and finally, RT are rising and will continue to rise. I suppose at its heart, my argument has been that social sustainability and economic sustainability requires reproduction, and reproductive leave and support are the next generation of policies that we need to be considering. Joyce Fletcher has argued in a very recent piece, a compendium put together by Lottie Balin and colleagues, that society relies on a labour of love to produce its citizens at no cost and with no disruption to its economic system or the gendered power dynamics on which it rests. We have to challenge those gendered power dynamics, and we have to challenge that it doesn't cost women to reproduce. As much as we all love children and our grandchildren in the current economic and workplace systems, that labour of love is a cost to women in workplaces and in society, and it's being felt in declining fertility rates, and it's ultimately a cost to sustainability and the future. For this reason, reproductive leave and support policies should be the next generation of policies we investigate, along with continuing our work on parental leaves, how they are designed, implemented and used. Thank you. Thank you. And that's a picture of the Gadi tree, or the grass tree that the Gadigal people are named after. Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Over to you. I beg your pardon? Three slides. Oh, yes. I don't know if you want to do the questions now.
Yes, I can't. Could I just, before you start, could I just check? Is this microphone on? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you just a brief
Yeah.
question, because
Is it
we're moving on to
clarification?
Peter. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not. That. Oh, 100 hours. That's a big clarification. Thank you. I will check that in the...
And it will be given for 3 times.
Yeah, you can. So it's 300 hours in total. Thank you for that. I'll go back to the source.
Yeah, some of the limitations of Gen AI. maybe.
Absolutely, I know. That's
Okay.
right. Thank you.
Okay, but we're moving now. Thank you ever so much, Marian.
Yeah.
As we said initially, very provocative, suggesting a reframing of our field to reflect
Thanks.
reproduction more generally. Thank you, Marian. And Peter, can I invite you up now to share your reflections on Marian's lecture? Thank you.
Do you want me to let that go? Not quite sure. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Well, good morning, everybody. And Marian, thank you very much for that very stimulating and unusual, because you brought on some very important new thinking for that very important presentation. It really is a privilege to be invited to speak, because this cost action project is such an important and ambitious project. The task it has set itself is to rethink and reconceptualize parental leave within a new frame, the frame of social sustainability, as a condition for not only individual but communal well-being lived within the limits of the planet. Marian's keynote makes an important contribution to that task by arguing that social sustainability must include a society's ability to reproduce itself, and that leave policy can and should support this reproductive labour, as well as a range of other socially desirable ends. She emphasises the importance of the design and the funding of parental leave, and the need for further research into a number of issues that may influence the effectiveness of parental leave. And the issue that particularly caught my attention is the needs of the informal workforce. You may remember the map, I think, produced by the International Labour Organization. Because I think the informal workforce is the biggest challenge of all, looked at from a global perspective. Because the ILO estimates that nearly 500 million self-employed women are not eligible for maternity leave and other leave policies. So, for example, across Africa, most countries have maternity leave, but the vast majority of women in those countries simply are not eligible because they are in this informal workforce. So this is a huge task to be undertaken that it's easy for those of us coming from high-income countries to overlook. Marian also argues for reframing parental leave policies as long-term investments in social infrastructure that is essential to sustainability. But, and this is a particularly important but, Marian argues that parental leave is a necessary but not sufficient part of that social infrastructure for social sustainability. Given what might be called a demographic crisis of aging populations and declining fertility, which we saw on that slide, parental leave needs to be understood and developed as part of a broad social policy ecosystem, I think Marian's words. And that ecosystem should include other measures and extends to support all stages of reproduction, what she calls reproductive support policies. Such policies, she concludes, should be the next generation of policies to investigate. As I've said, Marian's keynote makes an important contribution to a necessary process of reconceptualizing and reframing parental leave, helping us to think more strategically about parental leave and to think about it in relation to what the sociologist Karl Mannheim called a diagnosis of our time. As such, Marian's approach resonates with work that Andrea Doucette, who is with us today from Canada, and myself have been engaged on over the last year, writing a book titled Care Leaves and Care Time for All Towards Caring Worlds. The book is due to be published by Policy Press in the first half of next year. I hope you won't mind me putting an advanced advertisement before you. We situate our thinking for the book about care leaves in a diagnosis of our time that can be summed up in one word. The diagnosis is polycrisis. This word polycrisis captures the idea of multiple, converging, interconnected and complex crises, which together are more than the sums of their parts, and which together threaten the very existence of humankind. Indeed, it is worth remembering that the doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists was set this January at 89 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been to catastrophe since it was founded in 1947. The crises, plural, making up this polycrisis include multiple environmental disasters, not just global heating, but the collapse of biological diversity, the depletion of essential resources, and so forth. Science and technology developing far in advance of humankind's ability to assess and regulate them. And the dire consequences of a hegemonic neoliberal order. And fourthly, what has been called by Nancy Fraser and others, the crisis of care. The crisis of care is really a number of interlinked crises, plural, including the collapse of a model of caregiving that has depended on an endless supply of low-valued female caregivers, that labour of love felt as a cost to women that Marian referred to. But also the crisis of growing pressures that are squeezing care time. Care time needs to be slow time, and slow time is under great pressure from the pace of modern life. To which might be added the demographic crisis that Marian refers to. So faced by the polycrisis, by this existential polycrisis, building sustainability is essential. A sustainability in which the social, the economic and the environmental are recognized as inseparable. Perhaps we need to speak just of sustainability, although it's important to mention the social, which often gets lost in the larger challenge of the economic and the environmental. In our book, Andrea and I identify some of the problems with existing leave policies, problems that undermine their ability to contribute to sustainability, and in particular to mitigating the crisis of care. Parental leave policies that do not incentivize use by fathers, and Marian touched on those and showed how many countries have parental leave policies that simply do not work to encourage men to use them. A narrow focus in most leave policies on just one stage of the life course and on one care relationship, the narrow but very important relationship between parents and very young children. Too many people excluded from leave policies that are seen as an employment benefit, giving leave from work for some, rather than as a social right to give and receive care for all. and a lack of synergy between care leaves and services. So in response, Andrew and I put forward what we call a bold but modest proposal. Bold, because we think it transformative in thinking and policy. Modest, because we build on what others have already said or done. To take 3 examples. First, there is Marian's own work, including an excellent chapter in the Research Handbook on Leave Policies, my Bible in many respects. And that chapter by Marian and her colleagues is titled Broadening Our Conception of Leave. Leave to care for self or others over the life course. Leave to care for self or others over the life course. Second, there is the Belgium time credit system, initially introduced in the 1980s as a paid leave system that extended over the adult life course and acknowledged a variety of reasons for taking a break from employment. Now, the scope of the Belgian time credit system has narrowed in recent years, but it remains an important example of possibility. You can read about it in the annual review of the Leave Network if you want to get more information about it. There's also interesting chapters in the book Beyond Parental Leave and Beyond, written by Belgian researchers. And a third example is the 2022 report from the International Labour Organization, a report which was titled Care at Work, Investing in Care Leave and Services for a More Gender-Equal World of Work. If you've not seen it, I really encourage you to take a look. It's a really important report. This report includes a proposal for, quote, a transformative package of care policies, including income benefits, care services, and care leaves. And the ILO proposal is based on a number of important principles, and I quote here from the report. To maximize their transformative impact, care policy packages need to be rights-based and gender-responsive, integrated, universal, and based on solidarity, representation, and social dialogue. They should embrace a life cycle approach and comprise policies and services ranging from care leaves and breastfeeding entitlements to childcare and long-term leave services. So note, rights-based, gender-responsive, integrated, universal, based on solidarity, embracing a life cycle approach, and comprising a range of policies and services. So building on such previous work, the bold but modest proposal that Andrew and I put forward in our book has 3 separate but connected parts. 3 separate but connected parts. These are, first, moving from parental leaves to care leaves and care time across the life course. This is a temporal and a social ecological shift, as we propose that care leave should be available not only to care for others, but also for social ecological care and for care of the self, for example, reproductive health. Second, moving from care leaves as conditional employment benefits to care leaves as universal social rights, together with a care income. This is a shift to inclusiveness, to paid care leaves for all. And third, moving from care leaves as conditional employment benefits to care leaves and care time for all as part of an expanded approach to universal basic services. This is a shift to a new conceptual framework of universal basic services, or what, following Marian, we might term a new social policy ecosystem. So to sum up, our bold but modest proposal reconceptualizes care leaves as universal social rights and universal basic services running across the life course and providing opportunities to care not only for others, but for the self and the social and ecological environment. Care leaves plus a care income, expressing and enabling a right to give and a right to receive care. We situate our proposal for care leaves and care time for all within a sustainability frame as one necessary response to the polycrisis. But we also situate our proposal within two other frames. Joan Tronto's concept of caring democracies and the concept of caring economies discussed by the Women's Budget Group, Tim Jackson and others. Thus, in her book, which is titled Caring Democracies, Tronto argues that, and I quote, "If a democratic society has any commitments at all, it must have a commitment to making care, both receiving and giving care, equally and widely available to all." So she locates caregiving as a central feature of democracy. While in his new book, The Care Economy, Jackson insists, and again I quote, that the economy should concern itself first and foremost with care in all its forms rather than with relentless growth as it does at the moment. Because prosperity is primarily about health, the economy should always be about care. I'm talking, he writes, about economy as care. To conclude, in thinking and writing about care leaves for all, Andrea and I have gained much inspiration from being part of the community of scholars, both in the international network on leave policies and more recently in this exciting cost-action network. Marian's keynote exemplifies the rich potentiality of these networks with her explorations of possible new directions for leave policies, and even more important, new ways of thinking about and framing leave policies. There's certainly more work to be done on parental leave, both policy and research, and Marian has suggested some of those. But we must move beyond parental leave. Marian has shown us one important way in which we can do that. The urgent search for sustainability in the polycrisis will open up others. Thank you very much.
Well, Peter. What a way to start our first day here in Vilnius. We've had Marian introducing a new frame of reference for our thinking, reproductive leave. And then we've had Peter drawing on his work with Andrea in his interrogation of Marian's lecture, suggesting an even wider vision of a new ecosystem for parental leave to be considered within. I'm really aware when we have, as we have at the moment, some might say, a crisis in democracy, a twilight of democracy, that it's so encouraging to have these new ideas emerging amongst our scholars here and amongst other practitioners in knowledge and information and research exchange. Despite the polycrisis, we have many crises that we are experiencing and reflecting, and every day in our quick time there's a new worry or consideration for us to reflect on. We have the time as a group now to ask questions, offer viewpoints, offer just associations of feelings, emotions, and cognitions even that have been generated from the talks this morning. So can I just invite members of the audience to raise their hand and just say who they are when they ask their question. And before we start, however, Rūta, could you give us a judgment on time, where we are with time, before the break?
Yes, I think we can have at least 10 minutes for our discussion and continue with the coffee break, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I think it's fine. It should be fine.
Thank you, Philip.
Thanks, Philip. Oh, hold on. Is that on? Thanks, Philip, and so lovely to see you again. It's been a long time. As I was flying over, I was trying to find that place we had that wonderful workshop. What would I say? I'd say I understand what he's saying, but I'd then go on and say, and this is a very motherly thing to say, there's nothing more joyous in life than having children. Please have a child, especially if you're a grandparent. But I have struck this a lot, and what it brings to mind, I mean, I don't have a direct answer that will change his mind, but I think it's an issue, and I sort of alluded to it in my speech. I do feel we need to understand young men better than we do. I know there are people who've done great work on fathers, but we sort of need to get before they're fathers. We need to understand men before they commit to a partnership, before they think about parenting. In another research project, just very briefly, we interviewed men and women and surveyed them. The only group who did not think about becoming parents were men who were still single. So women who were single were thinking about it, women who were partnered or in jobs were thinking about it, so were their men, but not the men who were not the men who were still single. And I think that's a group that we really need to talk to. We need to understand. I hear different reasons. I thought you were going to say they are challenged and threatened by young women. I've heard that one too. They can't commit, they don't know what to say, they don't know how to approach a relationship. So I just think we don't know enough, but we need to create some optimism for them to have children. By the way, 34 is young for a man, to be honest. I wouldn't worry yet. Wait till he's 44.
Thank you, Marian. I have a question. Anna, and then Gerardo. Anna, do you want to just say again your full name?
I am rather concerned about what is reproduction resistant agenda. I come from Spain, where we do have a very strong industry around capital. I mean, this is why we are one of the countries. And I would say that I think already thinking we have a report on family policies and that they are
And I take your point because, although I didn't branch into that in the speech, we have been thinking very carefully about the implications of these reproductive support policies. I think you're alluding very strongly to the egg freezing policies, for example, and the techno companies getting into IVF and storage of embryos and sperms, etc. Undoubtedly, there is money to be made. And so there's that sort of commercial capitalist drive there. But there is also a group or a growing proportion of young women and men who are finding that they do need some assistance in reproduction. My call really is to say we need to be researching this and understanding it better, and to really consider the implications of these policies. I certainly am not arguing that we have one policy at the exclusion of other policies, not at all.
Aware of time, I know Gerardo wants to speak. Can I invite Peter if you wanted to say anything so far on the questions?
Well, I just wanted to go back to what Philip's point. I think the issue about men goes beyond fatherhood. What is very striking is every country I know is facing a chronic shortage of workers in care services. So the phenomenon that is happening, which is that women are no longer prepared to be low-valued caregivers, is not just an issue in families, but it's pervading our whole ability as societies to provide formal care provision. And at the heart of that is that men, for whatever reason, have not moved into working in preschools, for example, or leisure time centres, or looking after elderly people, and so on and so forth. So there is a profound issue here of gender care and employment, and it's well, I think we need to look beyond the issue of men perhaps not wanting to commit to being fathers. It's a much bigger issue. And I think the issue of people choosing to have children later, I think what Andrew and I are looking at is, if you like, a whole range of care leave possibilities, which would, for example, enable people to take long-term care if they have an elderly relative, for example, who is needing additional care. So if, as you get older, you want to have a child, but you're concerned about your parents, you can factor that in. But also that you should be able to take care for social and ecological reasons well before you decide to have children. For example, you might take a year out to work on an environmental project, or to become very involved in local democratic politics. So I think what we need to be moving towards is an idea that not just parental leave, but being able to take time to care rather than take leaving from work becomes much more normative, and you can factor it into your thinking throughout your life course.
Thank you, Peter. Because we're coming towards the end of the Q&A, I've got Gerardo on my radar. Anybody else, just quickly, who's not...
Margaret, can I just add to Peter
sure.
very
And
quickly?
then Gerardo,
I'll try this one. This one's working, I think. Peter, I agree with you completely, and this really brings together the issue of the employment system with the care system, which we've often separated. And I just want to say that one thing I'm proud of in Australia, last year I sat on the Fair Work Commission's review of the value of care work in the aged care sector, which is dominated by women and a growing sector, as you know. And we accepted the arguments that a new skill system had to be used that recognised invisible skills of care work, the emotional work, the loving work, the different type of work that work creates. And we raised the pay level of those workers by 25%, a huge increase. And we're already seeing now a shift in those workers. It's attracting other workers, which is causing a problem from other care sectors, but beginning to attract men, because one of the issues is the low pay in care jobs.
Another example of Australia moving ahead. Sorry, Gerardo and then Sonia. Thank you. Then we must finish. Can you ask questions consecutively, and then we'll get the panel. Thank you. Thank you, Gerardo. And Sonia, can we take your question now as well? Because we do need to finish, and then reflections from the two. Thank you. Very high percentage. Okay.
Quick reply. Yeah, quick reply to Gerardo. It's not that I don't understand the issue of early childhood education and care provision. It's that I wanted to raise something new for us to consider. It's quite clear that ECEC is a need in all societies, but I'd also argue that that alone will not change people's minds about having children. There are both physical reasons, it appears, and we don't know enough about that, and economic and social reasons that happen prior to sending a child to childcare. I'd also argue that with the decline in fertility rates, we're going to see a contraction of the ECEC sector because there aren't as many children being born. So what we need to do is consider, as I said, the whole ecosystem of what you might call reproduction policies or family formation policies or social sustainability policies or society sustainability policies.
Thank you, Mark. Peter, and then we really
thank you.
Yeah. So I did. The problems with age is your hearing gets very bad, so I apologise if I'm answering the wrong question, which is what politicians quite often do. One reason why I don't like the term childcare, which Margaret referred to, is because I think we should be talking about early childhood education and framing it in terms of children's right to education from birth, which is referred to in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So I think it's clear that although that is a right that should be provided, it's not It's not something that's going to change demography in a marked way, but we should do it because it's the right thing to do for children and not necessarily just for childcare reasons.
Thank you, Peter. When Thordis wrote the proposal for our successful cost action, with the help of Anne-Sophie de Vandre and me, we were very optimistic about society and progress. And today I think we'll be a little bit more moderated, but we do not want to be pessimistic. So thank you to speakers for introducing their concepts, and we now have time for coffee. Thank you.
Thank you once again for your kind keynote. And now we have a 20 minutes coffee break. Coffee is down and on the right. And please come back at 12.